Hello and welcome back to TeaBookClub. If you've been following along, we are an international group of people who read tea books, and we meet once a month to discuss them, share our thoughts, things we found interesting about the book, that kind of thing. TeaBookClub is focused on tea books, obviously, and we read a range of books from stories, travel stories, historic books, kind of Bibles of tea as it were, and also contemporary new books that have just come out. So the one that we've been reading this month is fairly new. It just came out last year. It's The Story of Japanese Tea by Tyas Sōsen, and it's absolutely fantastic. I've been really enjoying this, and hopefully if you're following along the other videos, you will have caught some snippets of it. So, every week I do a 5-minute reading, and I just read an excerpt from the book so that you can follow along, read along, or jump ahead and see where you might want to dip into the book. This week I'm starting at page 113, and the topic here is on wabi-sabi, which I know will be fascinating. The meaning of wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi is a term that is often used to allude to rustic simplicity and the art of imperfection in our lives. The term has its roots in the Japanese rite of tea, but is used today more often outside its original context. The notion itself has received a place in today's society as a mode of thought that should help us to live life more mindfully and aware of the inherent yet imperfect beauty of the things surrounding us. Needless to say that such interpretations fail to grasp the original meaning of wabi-sabi. This intermission aims to clarify what wabi-sabi is and how it should be understood. Background of wabi-sabi. Wabi-style tea can't be seen in disconnection with Shoin-style tea, for it is the Shoin style that, through influences from Zen Buddhism, evolved into wabi-style tea. The grand reception rooms at the mansions of the military elite in which those tea gatherings were held characterized the Shoin style. Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a great proponent of the style, which is clear because he spent most of his waking hours in pursuit of the way of tea, appreciating the arts. He also made it seem as if he had completely forgotten about his governmental responsibilities. For such gatherings, precious Chinese objects, known as karamono, were put on display in an unorderly fashion. Shoin-style tea was focused on a display of wealth and power through the collection of revered ancient Chinese implements. Murata Shuko influenced this custom by suggesting limiting the amount of utensils exposed, and Shuko's successor, Takano Jo, further developed the ways for constructing a tea hermitage as seen above. His alterations were variation on and simplification to the then current structures used for the service of tea. His suggestion for the addition of native objects for use in the rite of tea enforced a renewed luxurious sense of beauty as part of the wabi aesthetic, in opposition to the predominant karamono as the core for Shoin-style tea. Completion of the wabi aesthetic. During his final years, Rikyu's devotion to wabi tea resulted in the invention of his famed 1 mat and a half rustic tea hermitage. In likening to how the formal service of tea employing the daisu, grand sideboard, of Shoin-style tea was simplified with services using, for example, the kyu daisu and nagaita, the long board, during Shuko and Jo's time, so too was the preferential size of the tea chamber reduced from 4 mats and a half to 3 mats and a truncated matting segment, and consequently to 2 mats and a truncated matting segment. However, reducing the size of the tea chamber is not what symbolizes wabi tea. If a thorough feeling of wabi does not permeate the spirit of the person who takes position in this chamber, genuine wabi tea can't be achieved. An excerpt from the diary of Yamaue Soji provides information on the use of Rikyu's 1 mat and a half tea chamber in the following way. Soeki, Rikyu, is the first person to have built a 1 mat and a half tea chamber in Kyoto. Although it was an unusual thing at the time, someone with less skill than his would not have been able to put it to good use. Because Soeki is a master of the art, even if he would change mountains into valleys, swaps the west for the east, if he'd break every rule of the rite of tea and do whatever he pleases, the outcome would still be enthralling. But should an amateur imitator's style, it would simply not be tea. The functional use of this rare tea chamber could only be achieved because Rikyu had become the expert tea master he was. Should any aspirant attempt to ape him and say, "I am the embodiment of true wabi," while sitting in a 1 mat only chamber, we would say that this couldn't be anything other than ridiculous. Again, Katagiri Sekishu, the person who succeeded Kurobi Enshu as the official instructor in the way of tea at the shogunate, notes in his 300 articles that someone who has not reached the same mental attitude as Rikyū himself could not begin to understand this creativity. On the contrary, he even remarks that any ordinary enthusiast of the way of tea isn't capable of employing nor serving guests in such a space. Rikyū has reduced his tea chamber to 1 mat and a half. Even so, 1 mat and a half is the most extreme form of wabi. Therefore, we must be aware of the fact that great cleverness and understanding is required to enforce the formality of the 1 1/2 mat style. More often than not, when we use words as wabi or sabi, we constrict ourselves to only seeing this exterior form, while we refrain from trying to grasp the word's deeper meaning. Wabi or sabi are, as indicated by Sekishu, extremes, or the highest form of something. The emotional state reached when wabi is achieved only takes form after everything that could be done has been diligently completed. Wabi is therefore by no means represented by superficial images as small tea hermitage or warped tea bowls. The time during which Rikyū's wabi-style tea took shape was during the final years of the Warring States period, when the grasp for power, regardless of standing or rank, had yet to cool down, and when your fate was often decided by your own determination and emotional strength. It is during such a disorderly time that Rikyū's high-minded style of wabi tea took shape, and it is this emotional state that Shuko sought to convey when he chose the following poem by Fujiwara Sadaie as his definition of the true meaning of wabi. Gazing out, neither the beautiful cherry blossoms of spring nor autumn's bright red maple leaves remain, only a rush-thatched house by the seashore in autumn twilight. It is the lucid image of the empty sky after the beautiful blossoms and the maple leaves have fallen that made Shuko choose this poem as a clarification for the innermost secrets of the rite of tea. Someone who doesn't know the blossoms or the maple only sees the sad and hollow void, without the feelings of joy and sadness for what has been and what is to come. The image of the house by the shore is all he knows, the sadness of an enduring empty landscape. The notion of wabi is too immense to capture in a few words. In fact, it would call for tremendous understandings to try to capture the whole emotional state that is expressed by the word in any type of writing. If you truly seek an understanding of wabi, it is important to keep this to heart. Attempts to define wabi-sabi. When Joe, at the age of 32, visited the lacquerware dealer Matsuya, he had an experience that awoke him to the true meaning of Shuko's wabi-style tea. The transmission declares that it was the painting of a white heron by 10th century Chinese painter Zhu Ji. The painting was immensely grasping and was mounted on brilliant fabric. It was Shuko who decided to intentionally change the mounting to a more simple yet elegant material. The legend proclaims that when Joe saw the contrast between the splendid painting and its rustic framing, he immediately apprehended the core of Shuko's tea aesthetic. The story was passed on to many a tea practitioner, and Rikyū too used the tale to convey the true meaning of wabi tea to his pupils. Soon the painting became an object of reverence, and the saying, "Someone who hasn't seen the painting of the white heron is not a tea person," became a common sense. Unfortunately, this painting was lost during the Satsuma Rebellion after it had changed hands from Matsuya to the Shimadzu family in Kagoshima. It is clear that a definitive verbal definition for the meaning of wabi can't be achieved. The originators of the style used abstract allegories to illustrate what they understood under wabi. The style in itself isn't a merely cognitive approach to worldly things. On the contrary, it relies more on an emotional experience of the things as they in essence are. The term wabi has its original meaning in a sense of loneliness, one that can be likened to a solitary hermit living in a rustic mountain dwelling. This notion gradually transitioned to a liking for simplicity and quietude. Sabi, on the other hand, is used to refer to patina and the transience of things, the beauty of impermanence. It can be likened to a mixed emotion of joy and sadness. When we see something beautiful, for example, a camellia flower, drop in front of our eyes, we are overtaken by sadness for the flower's passing, but at the same time our heart is filled with joy, for we have witnessed it at its prime. And this feeling can only exist when we are aware of the natural flux of nature. We know that there comes an end to every flower, but we understand that in the next cycle it will appear again. This is the reality of the world we live in, and it is to give expression to this emotion that Shuko selected the poem by Sadaie. In attempt to clarify the meaning of Rikyū's wabi-style tea, he chose to a verse by Fujiwara Ietaka that represents his understanding of the concept and simultaneously alludes to and adds significance to Shuko's selected composition. To him who merely awaits the coming of spring's blossoms, I wish to point out the fresh grass shoots that eagerly look out from between the remnants of snow in the mountain villages. Having endured the long colds of winter, in certain places where the snow is melted, bright verdant shoots of grass give sight to their young faces. During the still lingering serenity of the final days of winter, we can already grasp a renewed vitality as an image of nature's concealed vigour. The choice for this poem ultimately gives insight in Riku's artistic imagination. Wabi-style tea evolved as a separation from the luxurious Shoin-style tea hosted in grand reception rooms at military mansions by adding Zen Buddhist influences to the praxis. As a result, displays of wealth and splendour were minimalised and spaces for the pastime of tea became smaller and smaller. In addition, the implementation of native objects for the use in the rite of tea completes Wabi as the antithesis of its grander predecessor style. The originators of Wabi tea understood that the true understanding of the style is conveyed in a direct emotional experience of it, and that any verbal definition would inevitably be inadequate to successfully encompass the extensiveness of its significance. They therefore relied on abstract images of poetic expression and painting to provide a means for the receiver to at least begin to approach the quintessence of their style. However, it is up to the adept to through diligent practice, study and meditation, nurture a full internal apprehension of the Wabi aesthetic. The following two precepts by the daimyo tea practitioner Katagari Sekishu beautifully summarize the intrinsic understanding of wabi-sabi presented here. As our expert forerunners in this praxis have warned us, true wabi cannot be manufactured or faked. It can only be discovered, heaven-guided. Since both completion and fullness are Since both completion and fullness are inimical to wabi, 2 to 3 lengths of material inadequately will naturally give rise to true fullness and satisfaction of the spirit. And we'll leave it there. If you enjoyed that, and it's always a pleasure to read interpretations of wabi-sabi, and it just adds more and more to one's understanding. And it's essential to tea, particularly Japanese tea practice, but also other tea practices as well. I think it goes hand in hand. Anyway, if you enjoyed that and would like to discuss that further, then head on over to TeaBookClub and join us. We will be meeting up to discuss this book shortly. We are actually changing the way that Book Club works, so we're extending the time that we take to read a book. So we will be discussing this book in full at the end of March, and in the meantime, at the end of February, beginning of March, so in the next week or two, we will be having a meet-up on a Japanese theme, and we're going to share some thoughts, but it's much more relaxed, and then we'll do the full discussion of the book at the end of March. I look forward to seeing you in the meet-up.